Good evening, and welcome once again to the Orsus Reading Room. Well, I'm afraid things are a little different this evening. For reasons known only to himself, William has decided that after, 8 interviews, it was apparently my turn. I objected, he ignored me. So, good evening, William. Good evening, Roger. You're sitting in my chair. I rather suspected you'd say that. You've spent 8 programs making everyone else feel slightly uncomfortable. It seemed only fair. Revenge? Balance. Very well, I'm entirely in your hands, which is a slightly alarming sentence now that I've actually said it aloud. Quite. Then let's begin. Not with the organisation, not with me. Tell me about your parents. Well, my mother, Hannah Vladka, was the bravest person I've ever known. She never called herself brave. People really do. She was 19 years old when the Warsaw Ghetto rose. She was a courier, one of the invisible people, moving messages, weapons, moving hope from one place to another. History always remembers the fighters. It sometimes forgets the people who made the fighting possible, and her mother was one of those. She never spoke about it. Very little. She didn't need to. Children notice silences long before they understand words. There were nights she'd simply sit quietly by the window, looking, not really seeing what was outside. Years later, I suppose I understood where she'd gone. And your father? Pretty charming. April 1945, the 15th of April, Bergen-Belsen, I should say. He entered through the gates with everybody else, like thousands of other soldiers. He thought he knew what he was about to find. Nobody did. He really spoke about it afterwards. Not because he couldn't remember, because memory was punishment enough. Did that shape you? Oh, completely. I grew up with 2 parents who had looked directly into opposite faces of the same machine, one from the inside and one from the outside. Neither of them ever told me who to hate, only to understand. That was a remarkable gift. Why history? Not military history, history. Well, because I want to know how civilization repeatedly convinced itself to become uncivilized. Every generation says, never again. History replies, really? I wasn't interested in battles. Battles are symptoms. I wanted to understand the institutions. Why ordinary people create extraordinary cruelty. How bureaucracy becomes evil whilst believing itself perfectly respectable. That question has occupied most of my life. It occupied mine long before yours. I know. Then came St. Andrews, October 1968. Tell me what you remember. Well, everything. You'd been advertised as a visiting lecturer, Mr. William or Mr. W. Cochrane, rather ordinary, rather forgettable, except that the lecture wasn't. For the first time in my academic life, well, very early in my academic life, somebody wasn't describing history. He was describing patterns, the architecture beneath history. That you spoke about institutions, about persecution, about continuity. You stopped, well, just short of saying something. I knew there was another sentence. You simply chose not to speak it. Well, there were other people in the room. Exactly. I remember thinking, whoever this man is, he knows. You left the lecture. Aye, well, and then you called my name. I never met you. You knew exactly who I was. I assumed you'd read my university file. Then, well, you mentioned my mother, Warsaw, my father, Belsen. Things no university file could possibly contain. And for a few moments, I genuinely wondered whether I should run away. You did look terrified. Oh, not terrified, relieved. I suppose for 22 years I believed I was chasing questions nobody else had even noticed. Then, suddenly there you were, already waiting. That's a very strange feeling, discovering you've spent your entire life looking for someone who had quietly been looking for you. And I took you for a drink. Aye, the 1926 Macallan. I still maintain that was a rather extravagant choice for a Tuesday afternoon. Well, it was an important conversation. It was. You told me enough. Not everything, just enough. When I went back to my rooms that night, I didn't sleep. I filled an entire notebook. I still have it. So do I. Of course you do. You kept a copy. Naturally. You really do prepare for everything. Roger, why did you stay? Not after St Andrews, after the first year, after you knew what we were. You could have walked away. Many have. I've asked myself that question many times. At first I thought it was the history. Then I thought it was friendship. Later I convinced myself it was duty. Well, the truth is it was all three. But there was something else. Go on. Well, a purpose. For the first time in my life, history wasn't simply something I studied. It became something I could protect. Not alter, that would be arrogance, but protect. Documents, people, truth, memory. It suddenly mattered whether somebody remembered accurately. I'd spent years asking, what happened? You quietly changed that question. You ask, why does it matter? I've been trying to answer that ever since. Who surprised you most? In the organisation? In life? Tom, without question. He arrived believing he was joining some sort of intelligence operation. Instead, he inherited 9,000 years of unfinished conversations. Most people would have run a mile, but he stayed. Not because he enjoyed danger, I think, but because he understood loyalty. Dusty. Braver than he realises. No, he still believes courage means never being frightened. I've never managed to convince him otherwise. Hugo? The finest soldier I've ever met. The most reluctant leader. He carries responsibility as though it were an apology. What about Taff? Utterly impossible. Give him a paper clip, 3 batteries in half an hour, and he'll accidentally invent the 22nd century. And Helen. History made human. People meet Constantine. I met Helen. Those were very different experiences. Salamo. The most gentlest, dangerous man I've ever known. Children instinctively trust him. So do I. Eleanor. Well, she's the repository's future. Not because she's clever, although she is. It's because she understands that knowledge is not possession. It's more of a stewardship. You recognised that long before the rest of us. You usually did. And me. Well, you always ask the awkward questions. Answer it. I stopped trying to understand you years ago. Not because I couldn't, because I realised I've been asking the wrong question. People always ask, who is William Cochrane? That's impossible. The better question is, what has William spent 900 years trying to preserve? Once I understand that, I stop worrying about the man and concentrated on the purpose, which is, civilization. Quietly, one generation at a time. You're kinder than I deserve. No, merely accurate. Do you remember the first book you gave me? Of course. Russell, History of Western Philosophy. Covered in notes it was. You returned it. Well, you underlined too much. I was 22. Everything seemed important. And now? Now I've realised that almost everything is connected, and that's different. Roger, why did you write our story? Because memory dies twice. Once, when those we love leave us. Again, when nobody remembers they were ever here. I looked round one day and realised Hugo, Dusty, Helen, Tom, Eleanor, Taft, Juba, Molly, all of you would eventually disappear. Perhaps not tomorrow. Perhaps not for centuries, but eventually. And when that happened, the machine would simply deny you'd ever existed. I couldn't allow that. Somebody had to remember. You once told me history belongs to everyone. Well, it does. Not quite. History belongs to those prepared to preserve it honestly. That is rather fewer people. Well, you're right, as usual. Not as usual, merely this time. One final question. Go on. When people finish reading these books, what do you hope they'll remember? Well, not me. Not even you. I hope they remember that actually ordinary people matter, that history isn't changed only by kings or presidents or generals. Sometimes it's changed by a courier carrying a messenger through Warsaw, a tunneler listening through the clay, a young officer refusing to abandon his soldiers, a librarian preserving one forgotten document, a teacher asking one awkward question. History belongs to all of them, always has, and it always will. Then you've understood. Stay where you are. You've spent 30 years asking questions. You've asked every one of us why we did what we did. Tonight, you answered your own. Roger, thank you. For what? For remembering us.